What's up? This is the Game Impulse. You know, Keith here, Tyler, and here comes Sam, and we're gonna be doing a discussion on the recent event in the news where Obama was requesting research to see if video games have any correlation to violence. Tyler, you want to kind of talk about, since you were the first person to hear about this in the article and whatnot?
Uh, yeah, I was just on GameInformer.com, and I saw an article that said Obama asked Congress to research if video games has any relationship, violent video games have any cause or connection with gun violence more in like reality in real life, and Obama's asking for like $10 million to do this with the Center of Disease and Disease Control and Prevention, who's going to be researching that. Joe Biden, though, met with video game industry heads, and they came to a conclusion that even though video games over the past few years have become so much more popular than what they've been before, that violence among youth has went down, so that there's no relationship. But we're going to just share our thoughts and discuss whether we think that violent video games have any impact on someone wanting to do acts of violence. So one of you guys can go first.
Alright,
Yeah.
I don't think it's video games entirely. It's, like, alright, you go back, like, just 300 years or whatever. Sure, there wasn't, like, you know, people going to schools with shootings and stuff like that. I mean, you know, things are different than they were back then, but, like, even 200 years ago, or 1850s, 1860s, you know, or even, like, the 1920s and stuff, there weren't, like, you know, school shootings all the time, and there wasn't, like, you know, stuff like there is now. It's like, it's partially to blame, you know, after 1950s and 60s and on, because I guess really to blame the violence, like, to where to place the blame, I guess, is just in general. There's movies, violent movies. Like, how do you expect kids, you know, to go to school and not think about violence at all when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the #1 movie in America? Like, that's just insane. You know, the movie's #1. People watched it and they're like, oh yeah, that's funny, or that's cool. Scary movies don't scare me, or whatever. Yeah, I mean, but when you really think about it, that's just like, you know, some of that stuff just affects people in ways. Violent video games, like Grand Theft Auto, is probably the #1 video game that comes to mind, like beating hookers and stealing cars and just walking around shooting people. I'm not gonna say that's like, that's an outlet for some people where they take their violence out, I guess, but, you know, you can't completely blame it on video games. It's just society in general, like how much it's changed. Video games is just, you know, like violent video games, I think it's just, it's a product of society that's, you know, the main thing to blame. But I don't think it's entirely, you can't entirely blame video games for people just, you know, being picked on or whatever, and then they go to school and then they shoot people. I mean, that's, you know, you blame the people that picked on them, and I don't know, it's just, it's kind of really general, and you probably know what I'm saying, because, I mean, it's kind of a basic opinion, but, you know, it's not entirely video games at fault, I guess. But, in a way, you could say, yeah, video games, violent movies, or violent video games, violent movies, you know, just stuff like that, you know, suicide bombers and stuff like that in real life, you know, it's just a combination, I guess. But I don't really think it's violent video games to be the complete blame, if you know what I'm saying. But I don't know. I think $10 million is a little extreme just for something people already kind of have the gist of. But that's all I have to
kind
say.
of a waste of money there.
Yeah. All right, with me, I agree with everything Sam said. And I honestly don't think. I mean, maybe they are a little bit. I also don't think video games are to blame, because I mean, if you kind of think about it, it's not the games, it's how the person interprets them, and kind of the person who's playing them. And so it's kind of like, if somebody, shoots somebody with a gun, you don't blame the gun, you blame the person. So I mean, it's kind of like the same thing. It's like, you don't blame the games, you blame, whatever the person who probably wasn't right in the head to begin with for playing them. Also, kind of another thing like Sam said, kind of like the media and all that. I think if you wanted to blame something in the media, I'd say movies and whatnot, like he said, because in a way, video games, yeah, video games can get violent, but they're not real people. And then when you look at like movies and television shows, they're actors, they're real people, and then they do everything they can to make it look real. I mean, like video games, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where it's, looks completely realistic. I think there's always going to be limitations like that. But, with the TV and whatnot, it's just like that. And I mean, for a lot of people that I know, video games are mostly like a way to vent. Like, it's kind of like, in a way, that's what they do instead of doing those violent things. It's like, oh, I'm really angry about something. All right, I'm going to go turn on my Xbox. I'm going to play something. It'll allow me to relieve stress. At least I think it's a way of preventing things like that, because now they have an outlet where they can kind of get those violent tendencies out of the way. I mean, and again, like I said earlier, it depends on the person. Like some people who are really violent, who have violent tendencies, they play video games. Some people, like I said, find that as a means to like calm themselves down, as a way to kind of get those feelings out and use them. And then some people use it as inspiration. But again, I think it's mostly just the people, and how, if you shouldn't be playing a violent game if you're not right in the head. If you're gonna start thinking, oh, looks real. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with these guys as well. And I think Keith made a really good point. It's more movies and TVs, and Sam said that, but it's more of like movies and TV shows. Like, you look at like Law and Order. There's a guy like holding a gun and shoots somebody in the face. That's a real person doing that. And when you play, I don't know, Grand Theft Auto or something, like, yeah, the graphics are as realistic as they can make them, but you should know that that's not real. That this is just a game. And if what was I gonna say? But you look at a lot of things in popular culture and entertainment. There's violence. Everyone loves violence. Violence is entertaining to everybody. You look at the popular game franchises. Almost all of them have some form of violence in it. Some more violent than others. And you look at the really popular detective type TV shows. They're violent, and the really popular movies violent. I mean, I'm not saying that not everything is violent, but most of them are violent. I mean, people love violence. People find violence entertaining. But I don't think it has any relationship with someone being like, wow, I'm going to go kill this person because I saw this in Grand Theft Auto and it was so cool, and I want to experience how that is in real life. I don't think that, and I don't think video games should be blamed as like a scapegoat for gun violence in the world. These guys kind of hit on everything, so I'm not really going to go on. But, yeah.
Yeah, and like I'm saying, I agree with Sam. That's a ridiculous amount of money to be spending on this. Because, I mean,
yeah.
And also, I mean, I can kind of understand where the Center of Disease Control and Prevention is coming from. I think they work with also, like, mental illness and whatnot, which I guess is part of that, in which I said, hey, if you're not right in the head, then you can't really blame video games for somebody who's not right in the head. I mean, yeah.
I guess one last thing. It's just like the weird thing is, I'm not saying I'm like really old or everything. I'm 18 years old, but it's just, I guess when I grew up, when I was young, we didn't have video games like we do now. Like kids growing up nowadays, the first video games they play could be Grand Theft Auto, and they just like dive right into that. I mean, when I started playing video games, I played like Pokemon Stadium. When I watched on TV, it was Pokemon and cartoons, and like nowadays, I guess kids like, you know, they just dive right into that. I mean, like, I guess I grew up in a time where it was just kind of like transitioning in like 90s. It was the 90s and the 80s, like the year of computer technology, and it was just kind of like just starting to get into that. So I wasn't really like, you know, forced into video games like, or not forced, but you know, I didn't just dive right into video games like Grand Theft Auto or anything like that. Like, I worked my way up to that, and you know, I guess the things I was taught, you know, and this is outside video games, the things I was taught and like, you know, the beliefs and morals that I have, just like, you know, like, it's common sense that it's not real, but it's just, it's kind of hard to say for some people, like, if you're, you know, 40 or 50, where, you know, you grew up with, like, no video games, and, you know, you don't understand why kids would act this way. Like, even I sometimes don't understand why some people would act like that. I mean, like, young kids just, like, I don't know, you know what I'm saying, though. They, like, the first game they might play is Grand Theft Auto, so I can't really say, like, you know, I never played that at a young age. I was never really, you know, I didn't get right into that when I was at a young age. You know, I started playing Grand Theft Auto when I was like 13 or 14 or whatever. I'm like, yeah, this is just a game, you know. Some kids may play it when they're like 8 or 9, like 7, 8, 9, like little spoiled brats or whatever, you know, whatever. But I've never really known about that when I was little, so I guess, you know better now, but I can't really say that kids know better. I mean, that's the sad thing, if they don't know better when they're that young, because those are the first games that they play. And I mean, you know what I'm saying, though. You can't really say, because you don't know how that affects people when they're that young. But I'm not saying that it is video games to blame. It's just, you can't really say when you know, haven't, like, grown up in, like, a certain era. With, like, computers now, like, kids have easy access to porn. When I was a kid, like, I didn't even know what a computer was until I was, like, 4 or 5 or something. Well, that's still young, but, like, you know, I wasn't on the computer all the time. I'm still not on the computer all the time. I barely use one. Just because I grew up in that time period. Like, kids now are, like, could be addicted to, like, computers. Even, like, 2 or 3 years younger than I am, could be, like, you know, they can't live their life without a computer, or their Grand Theft Auto games or something like that. So it's just kind of hard to say, like, through the progression stuff. Like, even the iPhone apps or whatever could be violent. But it's like, you don't really know unless you've been through that, and I haven't been through that. I'm just saying, like, when I grew up, I have enough common sense to know that, you know, this is just a game, though. So I could see where they might think that or something, you know, they could think violent video games could be a cause, or violent movies or something like that, but, you know, it's just the different time periods that kids grow up in.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And kind of like based off of what Tyler said, which was, you know, how there's just all kinds of violence, and violence is entertaining. That's the thing. Violence sells. That's kind of what's happened with the modern culture. And because of that, we've become so... What?
Look at, like, just football or something.
Yeah, football.
Football is very violent. Everybody loves football.
Yeah, and then it's like, we've all become so desensitized to violence and all that. But, I mean, again, but I think, you know, back in the 90s, there was a lot more, you know, school shootings and all that going on than there are now. There was even probably the most famous one happened in, like, 98 or 99. Columbine. That happened, you know. You know, people still are, you know, on about that to this day. So, I mean, it's not like all this, you know, these violent video games became popular, and then all of a sudden people started going into their schools with you know, with guns and shooting up their classmates and teachers and whatnot. I mean, it existed before, but I mean, I honestly don't think that you can blame video games.
Plus, kind of going back to Sam's point where he was saying how kids now grow up with, that stuff. Games, back when we grew up, they didn't look as real or anything as they do now. Like, some kid that might be playing Grand Theft Auto 4 and is like 8 or 9 or 10 years old would be like, wow, that looks so real, and might, think that. But back when we grew up, games weren't as violent and as real looking. Or, well, they were violent, but they weren't able to portray it because they didn't have the technology and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
They weren't as graphic.
Yeah, back in the day, the most realistic looking game was Duke Nukem 3D, and think how like low tech that is compared to what's out now.
I guess like the last thing I want to say is like I don't know how do I want to say this. Well, I guess you can't entirely blame video games. That's the big point, though. I mean, you can't blame video games for what kids do. It's all about the individual. But you can say that video games and computer games and websites and television and movies do have a little bit of an effect on people. Like, you show Texas Chainsaw Massacre to someone back in like 1930, they would, they don't want a part of that. Like, nowadays kids are just used to that. It's kind of like, they've adapted to this, but it's not entirely to blame. Again, it's all about the individual and the choices that they make, but I mean, we're in a society and age where stuff like that is like, just common stuff, like, oh, did you blow up that guy's head in that video game for an achievement? Yeah, dude, I did that like 2 weeks ago. I mean, I'm not saying that makes someone want to go out and blow up someone's head. That's not what it means. It's just people have been used to that. It's like violence doesn't scare them as much as it should. That's my last opinion. Anything else?
Yep.
This is all just opinion, though. So if you disagree with us, then that's cool. Let us know how you feel. Bye.